Hey there guys, Quinn of Snazzy Labs, and this is Techxplained, the button stays. Now, I'm sure as many, if not all of you know, there have been crazy amounts of rumors circling the interwebs over the last couple months on the iPad 3. What it's going to feature, what it's not going to feature, LTE, better battery, Retina display, no button. You know, there are so many different things we've heard, and we finally, today, found the slightest piece of solace because Apple sent out an invitation to a lot of the press telling people that there will be an event held at the Moscone Center on March 7th, wherein they will probably release the iPad 3. Now, they didn't say, hey guys, this is the iPad 3, because Apple has their way of doing things. They always send out a little witty, nondescript invitation or graphic, and a lot of people and a lot of journalists go amok over this little graphic. And they actually, quite often, have a bit of truth contained in them. And they have little teasers and little demos of what we might see at the event to come. Like last year on all of the icons, they had little radio bubbles, and on those radio bubbles was the pricing of the new iPhone. You know, so there's a bunch of different weird things that Apple does that grabs people's attentions. They're very clever and they're very witty. And this one was more simple than any other invitation we've seen in a long time. It said, we have something you really have to see. And it's a picture of an iPad with the text below. Now, people are freaking out about this for reasons that they don't need to freak out about. And by making these hasty generalizations, it's a really slippery slope. Now, there are tons of rumors surrounding this Retina display, which I actually do think we are going to see. But there's also one thing that looks a little bit out of place. Now, where there normally would be an where there normally would be a button if the device were in portrait mode, we have no idea of knowing this, but if it were, we would see a button. And in this image, there is no button. So a lot of people are freaking out saying, okay, this is the first iPad to be completely buttonless or to ditch the home button as a whole. But despite me thinking that's totally idiotic, and I'll get to that in a minute, I want to talk about this specific article that everyone's sharing around. It's from TechCrunch. Now, I'm not going to get into my hatred for TechCrunch because it's beyond belief. I think Mike Arrington is the world's largest douchebag, even more than me. But what I think is really, really interesting is that there was an article published yesterday from paidcontent.org that said TechCrunch's traffic is down 35% and they're already starting to fire off employees. Well, that doesn't look too good on TechCrunch's end, especially since The Verge and Engadget and a couple of these other websites are increasing in size. TechCrunch is kind of losing its fame and its best writers are leaving. Not to single specific writers out, Alexia Totsis, but some of the writing on TechCrunch is awful. It's terribly elementary. It's awful. And this news story came out yesterday. Obviously doesn't look good for AOL investors who are really, really involved with TechCrunch. So I think TechCrunch published this story today, not as an SEO grab. They would never do that. It's purely informational, and it's proof that the iPad 3 will have no buttons. No, it's a total SEO grab. TechCrunch is doing it to drive traffic, and good for them. They need traffic. But how they analyzed this was completely idiotic. They took pictures in the same orientation of an iPad 2 and an iPad 3. And they said, look, we're using a good camera, we're using a good lens, we're at the same distance, and look, there's more pixelization on the iPad 2 than the iPad 3. Okay, there's some merit to that. Maybe there is a high Retina display on there. But they also said, look, there's a button right here. And they said, look, and on the iPad 3, there's not a button. Well, guess what? The device might have been in landscape mode. So TechCrunch, of course, tested this as well and said, look, we put the iPad in landscape mode and the reflection doesn't match the reflection on the invitation. Shut up. Shut up. Really? Like, really? Do you guys honestly believe that Apple used the exact same lighting setup as TechCrunch, the exact same lenses as TechCrunch, the exact same screen brightness on the iPad as TechCrunch, and furthermore, how do you know that's even a photograph? Apple has some of the best GFX kind of oriented images on their website. They have some of the best mock-ups. All of the pictures you see on their website are not of real iPods, they are computer-generated images. How do you know that that invitation that was sent out today wasn't just a photoshopped image? There's no way of knowing, and it's idiotic, completely idiotic, to think that there would be in some way a connection between this reflection and this reflection. It's completely disastrous, so I really just want to discredit that article right away. Get that out of the way as soon as we can because it's complete and total crap. But now I want to talk about why the button stays, why I think the button stays, and why I think the button is absolutely monumental to the success of the iPad and the iPhone, and why it's prolific. The iPad and the iPhone, well, rather the iPhone and the iPod Touch, were the first devices to say, screw the buttons, this is the iPod. And they had that singular home button on the bottom. Now, I do think that Apple needs to address this home button issue. The home button, especially with all these double tap and triple tap things that we have now, it's not designed to be that resilient. It's not designed to be pushed repeatedly. And a lot of people have home button problems. It will collapse, it doesn't click, it gets sticky. There's a bunch of problems with mechanical buttons, but I think even still, they're a lot superior to software buttons. And let's talk about why I don't think Apple will do this. I have a couple notes, so don't freak out at me. I think one of the biggest things about the iPod and about the iPad is that this home button is iconic. It's been there for years. And it is the first and the most simple way to say, hey, look at us. If you ever get lost, if you ever get confused, hit the home button. It's a real button. You don't have to search for crap on the screen. Hit that button and you're back home. It's the first app to do that. Or really, it's the first device to do that. Now, what if they said, screw the mechanical button and got rid of that? I can tell you right now, my 83-year-old grandpa who just bought an iPad would not be able to learn all of this gesture stuff. A lot of people have said, yeah, okay, gestures are the future. They're ditching the buttons and they're going to say, learn these gestures. But people don't learn gestures. There's 5 or 6 different gestures. They're not going to go through and learn all of them. They don't do the 5-finger pinch. No one remembers that, or very few people remember that. Us, you know, you and me, you and I, we're power users. We get that. We use gestures all the time. We use the 3-finger swipes, but the majority of people, not just some people, but the majority of people have no freaking clue that there are gestures on the iPad or the MacBook or anything else of that matter. They just know how to work it, and they know that that home button is a surefire way to get back where they're unfamiliar. So it doesn't make sense to ditch that button because it's iconic, and learning gestures is not intuitive. It's a lot more work to remember and learn those gestures and make those gestures natural than a regular iPod and iPhone. Additionally, I want to talk about software buttons. I don't know how many of you have actually used software buttons, but they suck. I've had so many different phones, from Windows phones to Android phones to Android tablets, where these gestures have been amuck. They're terrible. These buttons get bumped all the time when you're gaming or web browsing or checking email. They get swiped by your hand. You get back to the main home screen. They do a bunch of weird stuff. You do gestures accidentally. You do gestures in games. They're limited by the API. Game developers can't create intuitive ways to control stuff because it will trigger a home button or something of that nature. It's completely idiotic to assume that Apple will do that. Now, okay, let's say Apple does. It still doesn't make sense. And Apple is stupid. No, I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying, A, a button doesn't make sense. And if Apple was to do a button, then they would do it better than anyone else. Or if they were to get rid of this button. If anyone could pull off gesture kind of stuff, it would be Apple. But look at how many applications use these pinches and use these modulations that Apple would have to say, oh, hey, by the way, we're overriding those in your app. A lot of legacy apps use these, and functionality would be tampered with. Now, what if they made this bottom part touch sensitive? It still doesn't make sense. It's not intuitive. It's not good. Capacitive buttons take more power, albeit not much, but some power. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't understand why everyone's freaking out about this button because A, it's a freaking button, and B, it doesn't make sense. You know, who cares? Let's wait till May 7th or March 7th. I just don't see the logic and reasoning for ditching the home button. But albeit, nonetheless, quit talking about this. It's a waste of your time. There's a hair in the way. I'm really vexed. Don't get me started on Google. I'm an angry tech guy. I'm saying, look at the facts. Look at what's happened the last several months, and look at every other device that's integrative, capacitive crap. It's garbage. It sucks. It's annoying. And sure, there's probably higher efficiency and higher reliability on Apple's end, but Apple doesn't care if they need to replace a button on someone's phone every once in a while. They care that they sell stuff because it works. And if these gestures muck up the rest of the device, and my grandpa doesn't go out and buy an iPad because he's like, how the heck do I control this? It's going to hurt sales. It's going to hurt Apple. And Apple knows better in the first place. They wouldn't do this because it's counterintuitive. Stop watching me. Stay snazzy, folks.